Greetings and salutations, friends and gamers of all stripes. My name is GM Dave, and I am your man behind the screen. Darth Vader, the Joker, Maleficent, Hannibal Lecter, Voss, Annie Wilkes, Walter White. When you hear those names, what comes to mind? Without a doubt, it must be their acts of villainy. All of these characters are great villains in their own right, and many of them for wildly different reasons. Indeed, a great villain can often be the most memorable and impactful parts of the media we consume, as they are so often the driving forces in the stories we tell. The same is true of our tabletop games. Because of this, as GMs, we often find ourselves striving to create great and memorable villains of our own, that perfect antagonist for the characters your players bring. So, friends and gamers, today I'd like to pose a question. What makes a great villain? Now, there are many kinds of villains out there. Darth Vader is a wildly different kind of villain from the Joker, who is in turn nothing like Ursula the Sea Witch, who herself is a far cry from the likes of Michael Myers. Fortunately, there are aspects of all the truly great villains that are shared, and today we'll break down the three I find to be the most universal in the hopes of seeing how we can apply them to our games. Number 1. A great villain is a motivated villain. Every great villain has motivation, a core desire that drives them to do the wicked things they do. Generally speaking, that motivation usually takes the form of a great desire to obtain something that lies out of reach. This can be many things, a specific item or items of particular use to them, such as Ursula's desire to obtain the trident of King Triton so she could use the power to conquer the seas. It could be a position of status, such as Scar's desire to be king in the place of Mufasa. Then there are personal desires, such as revenge or punishment for a slight, such as what Maleficent sought after the king and queen insulted her by openly stating she was unwelcome at the celebration of Princess Aurora's birth. It could even be an ideal, like Darth Vader, who desired to forge a peaceful galaxy free of destructive conflict under the yoke of the Empire, or Magneto, who wished to create a world where mutants like him could live free of the persecution he and his family experienced as Jews at the hands of the Nazis. It can even be something as base and primal as the desire to kill or eat, like the terrifying Xenomorph from the Alien franchise. Whatever it might be, every great villain has a motivation that, at some point in their story, must be made clear. In so doing, we come to understand them better as their desires and the reasoning behind those desires become more apparent. Something like this can even have the added benefit of making them feel relatable, as is the case with the previously mentioned Magneto or Batman the Animated Series' version of Mr. Freeze, both of whom have downright tragic backstories that drove them to do horrible things in the hopes of achieving the goals that we, as the audience, can deeply sympathize with. Indeed, the value of giving our villains a strong motivation cannot be stressed enough, especially since that motivation will often run counter to what the PCs want as well. And speaking of, 2. A great villain wants the opposite of what the heroes want, and they act on that want. Not every great villain needs to be a foil for the heroes, but their desires should put them directly at odds with the desires of your party. The Joker may be the foil for Batman, with his every want and need opposing everything Batman stands for, but that doesn't mean that Two-Face, Bane, Catwoman, or Ra's al Ghul don't hold wants that oppose Batman's too. Even Mr. Freeze, whom Batman deeply sympathizes with in the early episodes of the animated series, held desires that opposed the code Batman wanted to uphold. He didn't just want to save the life of his wife Nora, he wanted revenge against the man who was going to leave her to die and nearly killed him. His desire for revenge ironically burned so deep that nearly every other emotion, in his words, had been frozen dead in him. The desires of your villain should stand in some way counter to those of your PCs. By doing this, you not only create a great catalyst for the ongoing conflict in your games, but you also give players instances of motivation that they can latch onto. Having your villain act on these opposing desires enables you to create moments that stand as clear examples of why that villain should be stopped, especially when you show just how negatively these moments can impact your players and the characters in the game around them. And finally, 3. A great villain is feared. A small caveat before I continue, a great villain does not need to be feared by everyone, the way Darth Vader, Voldemort, or Sauron would be. But they should be feared to at least some degree by the people whose lives they impact, and that can and should include the PCs in the case of our gaming. This fear, I believe, sits at the heart of why we so love to hate great villains. This is not to downplay the importance of their motivation, of course. You could have the most brutally savage murderer ever written into your story, complete with a city full of people that fear walking the streets at night because they might well be the next victim. But if their motivation doesn't properly fit, then all that fear isn't really going to translate well to the audience. It's a package deal. Without a good motivation, the effect of that fear and the actions that cause that fear is going to largely be lost. But if your villain does have strong motivation backing them and are also able to instill fear in the people around them through their actions, at least to a degree, then you've got the pieces necessary to start building a truly great villain. Bear in mind, this isn't just limited to horror villains. Take Judge Claude Frollo from Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Within the first few minutes of the movie, this man who is so certain of the righteousness of his cause runs down Quasimodo's mother, kills her on the steps of the Notre Dame Cathedral, and then is about to murder Quasimodo as a baby because he believes the malformed child must be a demon. Then, throughout the rest of the film, his motivations continue to be made clear, and he commits dozens of heinous acts, ranging from the aforementioned murder to burning down entire swaths of Paris in his lustful search for Esmeralda. He sows fear in the people around him wherever he goes, fear justifiably driven by his actions and motivations. And because of that, he stands as one of Disney's most memorable villains ever, even if the movie that he comes from isn't quite as well loved on the whole as the ones that came before it. But a fearsome villain doesn't necessarily need to come from a darker story like that of Hunchback of Notre Dame either. Sometimes they can even be treated as something comical. Let's take General Zhao from Avatar: The Last Airbender, for example. Through most of his encounters with Aang and the rest of Team Avatar, Zhao is made out to be something of a joke. He's easily driven to anger, he acts with dishonor according to the codes of his own people, and he often finds himself tricked by Aang into situations that are self-defeating. The most memorable instance of this certainly has to be when Zhao burned down his own ships after Aang started studying firebending under a master that he realized also taught Zhao. And yet, despite all of this, Zhao also managed to capture Aang on a few occasions, rise in the ranks of the Fire Nation military, and nearly defeated the very well-fortified Northern Water Tribe at night, which is the time when the waterbenders who live in the tribe are at their most powerful. Though he was treated as a joke, he was very good at what he did, and he still managed to instill a sense of fear and intimidation through the people around him. But the butt of many jokes though he was, Zhao doesn't quite reach the realm of something fully comical in the way of a villain. A better example of that would actually come from Tangled, and their primary villain, Mother Gothel. Mother Gothel isn't a being of impressive stature or incredible power. She isn't a talented general who ends up being the butt of a few jokes, nor is she some harbinger of ancient and powerful evil like Maleficent would be. Instead, Mother Gothel is simply an old hag who stole Rapunzel away in the dead of night to siphon the magic that was trapped in her hair so she could keep herself young and beautiful forever. And how does she do this? Largely by making Rapunzel think that she is her mother and being downright hilarious while doing so. And yet, as funny and silly as she is, the lengths she's willing to go to in order to get what she wants really are quite scary when you start to think about it. She traps Rapunzel alone in a tower, secluded from the rest of the world for what was her entire life up to that point. For 18 years, Rapunzel was never allowed out of that tower, and any time she tried to convince Mother Gothel to let her leave, Gothel would manipulate her with overblown lies about the horrors of the outside world and how Rapunzel would surely get hurt if she left. She guilted her into staying, and when Rapunzel finally did leave, Gothel pursued her, scheming the entire time about how she would recapture her. At a certain point, she even went as far as to hire mercenaries to murder the man that Rapunzel escaped with, the thief Flynn Rider, all so that she could point the finger at Rapunzel and falsely blame the fault for his death on her hands, thereby guilting her into returning to the tower again. Throughout the whole of Tangled, Mother Gothel doesn't come across as intimidating or fearsome in the same way that Darth Vader or Frollo or any of the more typical, for want of a better term, villains would. However, hilariously comical though her performance is, Gothel's scheming and manipulation leads her to be a fearsome and intimidating factor in the lives of those around her, namely Rapunzel and Flynn, because nobody can really be sure of just how far she's willing to go to get what she wants. And because of that, even though she is comical at her core, she also still manages to capture that essence of fear that sits at the heart of every great villain. That's all I have for you today, friends and gamers. If you liked this topic, please feel free to leave it a like. What are your thoughts on these ideas of the three parts of what constitute a great villain? Do you agree with my assessment, or do you think there's something else at the heart of what makes great villains so great and memorable? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel for more, and hit that bell notification icon while you're at it. Furthermore, to get more timely notifications, make sure that you follow me on social media as well. Links are in the description down below. And while you're down there, consider donating to my Patreon. Every dollar would be greatly appreciated, and all of it is going to go towards keeping a roof over my head and eventually improving my setup here so that I can provide you with better quality videos in the future. Lastly, while you're down there, make sure to check out my links for my BitChute page and my webcomic Phoenix Rising while you're at it. We just recently posted the 3rd episode of Phoenix Rising just this last Saturday. And with all of that said, friends and gamers of all stripes, as usual, my name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen, and it is my sincere hope that you continue to roll high, roleplay well, game on.